hat.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Welcome, everybody. My name is Derek Bermel. I'm the artist in residence here at the Institute for Advanced Study. Advanced Study. I've learned that.
Separate the consonants
Right,
when you
right.
sing.
That's rule number 8, I think, in here. But this is Stephen Sondheim, who is here to talk with us a little bit about, mainly about these two fabulous new books. This is hot off the press, actually. This is not even out yet. So it's a collector's item for 2 weeks,
Right.
after which you can all buy your copy. But
36% off at Amazon.
is that true? Oh. So is that a good sign?
Do I know?
We don't know, yeah. So anyway, I've been looking through this book a lot, and we were just chatting about well, this and that, and I wanted to just say a little something about this book, because it is collected lyrics. This first book, 1954 to 1981, but it comes with attendant comments, principles, heresies, grudges, wines, and anecdotes. And so there's a lot of information, and it kind of all comes together. You disperse it throughout. What was it like to try to put all these lyrics down into a book?
Well, I come from German heritage, so I keep very, very careful files. Every piece of paper I've ever written on since I was about 15 years old, I still have. So, and they're all organized. So it wasn't
Were they
too hard.
already organized?
Oh yeah, Year by little boxes, year by year by year by year. It's just it wasn't for a purpose. It's just who I am, and so it wasn't hard to find the original sketches. A lot of for those of you who haven't seen the book, a lot of the lyrics show the original sketches and what the early versions and the subsequent versions and revisions and that sort of thing, and that was easy enough to find.
Oh yeah, because it's interesting. For the first few chapters, it seemed like they were all done on a legal pad, and then you moved to typing.
Well,
at a
no.
certain point,
Always
or
went from the legal pad to typing. I never
I
wrote
see.
at a typewriter, but
Okay.
but no, I always write on a legal pad.
Okay.
Although recently, over the last couple of years, I've started occasionally to write on a laptop a little bit. Not write, just sketch things out. But there's something, as you know, as a piano player, there's something from here to here to here that's personal. A pencil is personal.
Yep. All those
This is
muscles
not-
in between,
Yeah, exactly.
ending up here.
Although I remember when the IBM Selectric typewriter came out. I just loved typing. See that little ball spin. That was fun.
Is it different once it gets here from here? Can you ever?
Oh
feel?
yes. It's once it's down on paper, it's like it suddenly goes into aspic, and it's like, that's it now. It's not going to get any better. So I usually delay putting it there. But with a computer, it's the pleasure with a computer is that you can take lines or sections or verses or couplets and switch them all over the place immediately. When you have to do it with pencil, it takes so long to do that. And that's the great advantage of a computer, is how quickly you can replace things. And also how you can quickly, what would it look like if this section were up here? Well, if you've got it on yellow pad, you have to rewrite the section or something like that, or you have to read this first and then read that and then read this. Here, you just go, and there it is. And you say, oh yeah, much better.
But don't you find, because I find with music a lot, that, well, when you erase, you can see the erasure, and there's something nice about that. Also, I mean, in the legal pad sketches, you can put the word down.
Yeah,
there.
I don't erase. I just cross it out, and usually cross it out lightly because I realize that I may not. So
Right.
generally, everything's available. When the music programs came out, I thought Johnny Kander of Kander and Ebb immediately went. I think he went immediately into Finale and spent months learning that. And I thought, because he told me, see, I can play something, and it automatically not only goes into a computer, but it automatically gets printed out. And I thought, gee, that'd be great. You just play something, you don't have to write all the notes out. And then I realized, how do you keep all your sketches? You know, because you play this and you write it out, then you do a variation, you write it out, and you do a variation, write it out, and then eventually you look at all the pages and you say, okay, I think, oh no, wait a minute, what did I write on Tuesday? I had something very good there, and you go back and then you put it together. Well, if it's all printed out, there's no way to do that.
Right,
You just have
right.
stacks of paper like that.
right.
So I didn't bother to learn finale.
Right. Well, he may have learned score, which was the first one that.
It may have been the first one, but I know he learned finale because
he learned finale.
I'd heard how difficult it was, and I said to him, how long have you been studying? He said, 3 months. I said, he said, no, I got more to do. No, apparently Sibelius is the easiest
That's
one.
what I use now, but I
Oh, yeah?
switched. I switched midway
Fr-
through. This is really nerdy.
When, no, well, come on. But I mean, isn't that why we're here? Isn't this supposed to be?
Everyone gets
If we want to talk about the weather, we can do that. Well, come on.
No, but it is true. Sibelius is a program that now I use it because I think it's more intuitive.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. That's right. I heard the finale's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And so, but
These are
still,
computer
I'm still
programs,
doing it
not-
with pencil.
Not Finnish composers.
Yeah.
I mean, named after the composer, just so people know. But what's interesting to me about this is, I mean, because this is, you know, you get to look at his process in this, which is so fascinating. The process of writing a song. I mean, you really, you know, you bared yourself to the world here. I mean, artistically, and you don't seem to have a problem with that because I guess you said you like seeing the way things work.
It comes about from seeing. I remember the first time I think I ever saw Process was the famous marked up manuscript of The Wasteland that Ezra Pound corrected. And I was fascinated because we had studied The Wasteland in college, and I thought, look what he crossed out, look what he changed. And
Eliot? You're talking
yeah,
about?
Eliot,
Eliot,
yeah,
yeah.
Eliot. But Ezra Pound, remember, corrected it.
Oh, corrected it. That's right,
Corrected
that's
it, and Eliot then sometimes
Right,
rewrote,
right.
and then there were Ezra Pound's notes on it.
Right,
So you got the two views of a given line or something. And then I started hanging around the Morgan Library because I remember seeing the Bronte exhibition there and seeing for you the tiny writing and the tiny little cross out, and you get into the soul and into the brain of a writer by seeing the process there and seeing the sketches.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful. One of the great things, I saw it musically. I went down to the Library of Congress and they showed me Gershwin's sketches for Porgy and Bess. And you could see, for example, in Bessie Was My Woman, he wrote it on music paper instead of like that. The music paper was like in a notebook, like with 6 staves, so it was, you know, like an autograph book. And at the beginning, you could see he was writing out the melody and all the chords and all the little contrapuntal things. And then as it got on, the accompaniment started to disappear. And finally, about the 40 bars in, he was just writing the melody with an occasional chord underneath. He was thinking so fast that he didn't have time to write the accompaniment. He thought, I'll do the accompaniment later. I know that's going to be a C-sharp minor chord. I got it. And it was thrilling because I got right into his head. So I thought, you know, anybody who's interested in lyric writing, let him see the process.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just that there are probably a lot of people that would not want to reveal that because they're revealing.
Yeah, you reveal the rotten line. So you know, but
yeah,
you know that.
you know.
But isn't it nice? Look what good taste I have. I didn't use the bad line.
That's right. Well, and also you said that you like knowing how things work. You like watching cooking show even if you don't cook.
Yeah, right. Oh, I think I will. I've no desire to cook, but I read cooking columns because the process of how dishes get prepared is absolutely fascinating. I think if you read anything that's written by somebody who's an expert in his field, whether it's raising cattle or cooking or mixing paint, it's fascinating to me. The process by which we use our imagination and make something come out at the end. And so I wanted to go into detail because very few people have written, because it's such a small, what shall I say, it's a corner of a cottage industry writing lyrics for the theater. You know, it's that side. And I thought, how many people are going to be interested? But for anybody who's interested, this shows you how one person approaches the problems.
Yeah. And you have these 3 maxims that you start out with. Content dictates form, less is more, and God is in the details. is it God with a small g or a big G?
Well, many people say the devil is in the details.
Right.
For me, God is in the details.
What's the difference?
Well, the details are what give body to anything. If you don't want to say cat, you want to say Siamese cat. You want an image that the only way to build up something is through specifics.
Yeah,
And I just think, and that's what I really mean by details. But it's also details of rhyme, details of diction. I mean, details of prosody, details of phrasing. Are you going to use the two consonants? You put the two consonants together. It's going to be difficult for the tongue and the teeth, so that affects the music. So maybe you need a little beat in there. Blah blah blah. And all that stuff is, it's what makes for good art is attention to detail.
Yeah, and good puzzles.
Yeah, exactly. Good puzzles too. And art is a kind of puzzle. I'm putting together a painting or putting together a symphony or putting together a lyric is a kind of puzzle. Of course it is. And but it's the meticulousness of details that make something seem like a whole instead of this and then that and then that. So
And when you say,
make a form.
I mean, when you say content dictates form, so then what's interesting is that is the difference between that and the great composer saying, "I am going to write a fugue."
That's right. Exactly.
Write fugue. Okay, so this is the opposite, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
If you have an idea, if you have a motif that you think should lend itself to a fugal form, you write a fugue. But not all motifs do that.
Yeah.
You don't.
Oh,
you
so
don't. You don't take
interesting.
a Rachmaninoff melodic line and write a fugue about it because it's the size of this room.
Right. And then, unless you want to write a 25-voice fugue. Or
That's
something,
right.
I guess.
If
But
you're Thomas Tallis, that's another matter.
Right. Yeah, that makes me think about, because I did get a look at some sketches that Bach had done, and what's so interesting about Bach sketches are that he spends a long time sketching the motif, the opening motif. I mean, you could see that he's really working on are those first.
Wow.
That first.
Because he
bit.
wants to be sure
There's
that it's got enough material in it to build the cathedral. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the rest of it is almost no sketch. He's just kind of working it out,
Where did you? I
I
didn't know his sketches existed. This is news to me.
That was.
Wow.
I mean, this is long.
Goodness gracious.
In the
No,
recesses of my brain.
I just didn't know
But
they existed.
No, they Bach sketches. They have Bach sketches. I mean, I guess what they don't really have are Mozart sketches, which they thought he didn't sketch, but actually he did, but he burned them.
Oh, really? Why? Because he wanted to seem like a genius who just did it while he was playing pool?
Or maybe they just needed fuel for the fire. Because I don't know at that time if they had that conscious self-consciousness.
I mean, but that's the myth about him, is that he would play billiards and in between shots write, the Jupiter Symphony.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've seen. I mean, people tend to. I mean, because Mozart gets that rep, but because I know that they did find some sketches of Mozart recently, and they were unlike anything else that. Well, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I wonder if some of it was because there wasn't that self-consciousness about saving your sketches and being a.
No, well, that's why I'm surprised. But Bach stuff just seems like such monumental stuff. I can't think of him making sketches because he is a guy I expect that in the bathtub he wrote, the Art of the Fugue. I just,
It's probably true. I mean, once he got that first theme, I think he went straight to the bathtub and just.
But it's interesting that he worked so much on the theme because that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, because I guess he was probably looking for something that was malleable. I suppose. Yeah.
Something you can stretch, something you can do an inversion.
Yeah.
Something you do
And you worked with Milton Babbitt, the great Milton Babbitt, who was a Princeton.
He's the one who taught me, that a Bach fugue. He said, "Look, here's a 5-note theme. Now and he used the word cathedral. He said, "Look at the cathedral he built out of it," and it's astonishing.
Yeah.
But now that you tell me that you worked on those 5 notes that much, I feel better.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to dig up those sketches. I don't know where I hid them, but they're probably somewhere. But you actually have said that you enjoy writing music more than writing lyrics.
Well, sure. First of all, everybody understands the English language, so you can't get away with much. But very few people understand music. You can get away with a lot.
So it's because it's more abstract, or more?
Yeah, it's more abstract. Also, when I say I enjoy writing music, as you know, it's fun to sit at a piano and noodle. You can't really noodle with words, but but you can noodle on a piano, and that's just fun. And occasionally you come up with an idea if you're writing at the piano. I write some, you know, I try to write away from the piano, because if you write at the piano, you get limited by your own technique. And I have a very good right hand and locks for a left hand. And so I try not to write at the piano. And also you get muscle memory. Your fingers go into the same chords that you've used before, and the same figurations.
Yeah.
So I try, but I do write at the piano, and when I get at the piano, it's really fun to write. It's fun to play.
There's a great book by Horowitz, the guy. He wrote a book about your music as opposed to...
Mark Horowitz.
Yeah, Mark Horowitz.
He's the curator of the Library of Congress.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. It's actually because I was reading this and I emailed a friend that we're going to have this conversation, and he emailed back, well, yeah, but somebody should write about the music. And I said, well, someone has written about the music, because I mean, he actually did quite in-depth look at some spots, not exhaustive.
He sometimes over-exhausted.
Yeah.
And no, he came to the house, and we went over my sketches, and because one of the things I learned from Milton was long line composition. So you sort of sketch your whole piece in a couple of staves of where the harmonies are going, that sort of thing. And he'd say, now wait a minute, does this B flat mean you were thinking of going into B flat there, or is this the and of course I couldn't remember. So he analyzed it, and then as he would analyze, I realized he's over-analyzing it. That happens with people. But most of his stuff is very insightful. He's very, very good at. He often figured out exactly what was going on in my mind. I would say, yep, that's what I was thinking of.
But you did, so you worked with him, you worked on the theater, but did you know it, before you went to work with him, did you know that he liked musical theater? Did you know
you're talking about Milton?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When I went to Williams College, I majored in music, and I wanted to do postgraduate work, but I didn't want musicology. Was not interested in history. I was interested in theory and composition, because I went to a small college, and the music department was two men, one of whom taught piano and the other one of whom taught everything else. And so there was a little bit of theory, and that was it. We studied first and second species counterpoint, and then I graduated. So I wanted to learn more. And I think it was this man that changed my life. His name was Robert Barrow, who was a music professor at Williams. He was very conservative, but he knew, and he had kind of real disdain for the musical theater. I think he would have liked me to be writing concert music, but he said, I know somebody who could teach you who also loves musical theater, and as a matter of fact has written songs. I said, who? His name is Milton Babbitt. And then I found out, the kind of music that Milton wrote, and I thought, write songs? When I met him, he was writing a musical for Mary Martin based on Helen of Troy. And it never got on. But he really was, and we would spend the first hour of every 4 hours. We met once a week for 4 hours, and in New York City. I didn't come out to Princeton, which is where he was teaching the other times of the week. And we'd spend the first hour analyzing Rodgers and Hart or Gershwin or his favorites, De Silva, Brown, and Henderson, people who wrote, Birth of the Blues and such songs. And then we would go on to the Jupiter Symphony. And same principles, exactly. He said, it's exactly the same principle that holds this tune together. I remember he gave a wonderful analysis, which I can still do. And when I taught at Oxford about 15 years ago to a class of 13 songwriters, musicians and lyricists, and the lyricist said, we'd love to hear something about music. I said, love to hear, but music is its own language, and I'd have to explain what the diatonic scale is, and I have to explain what cadences are. They said, but do it anyway. And I recreated Milton's analysis of All the Things You Are, one of the great songs ever written. And it's a fascinating, that harmonically, that song is completely unlike any other song ever written. And I remember exactly the way Milton analyzed it. I can remember to this day.
Well, it starts on a 2 chord.
Yeah, exactly. Well, first, and then it goes through a circle of fifths, and then when it breaks into the tritone, it defines the key it's going to and the key you're coming from at the same time. It's dazzling. I said to him, did Kern really think of all these things as he was doing? He said, no. He said, have you ever driven a stick shift car? And I said, yeah, I grew up. He said, so you learn to do it, and eventually it becomes second nature.
Yeah.
You know how to do the clutch and the throttle and all at the same time. You don't have to think. He said Kern didn't have to think. He'd been doing it so long.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's like about how Gershwin really wanted a teacher like that, and eventually went to Schillinger.
Schillinger, yeah.
But I think Schillinger, I mean, he basically just told Gershwin what he was already doing,
Yeah,
pretty
right.
much, and gave him labels, and then he was happy and went back to the States and said, I'm using this or that interval, and everybody was.
you know,
thought it was
Gershwin
impressive.
wanted to study with Ravel, and Ravel said, "I'd rather study with you." It's true.
yeah,
It's true.
yeah.
And then he wrote the piano concerto, and you could say, he's been
Yeah,
studying with
that's
Gershwin.
right. That trumpet
He's been
solo,
studying
yeah,
with
yeah,
Gershwin,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, there are little Gershwin. I mean, I was thinking about that. Da, 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 da. You know, I was thinking in Sweeney Todd that moment of.
And, the blue
Joanna,
note.
yeah,
blue
the
note
blue,
line.
yeah, yeah,
It
which is-
sounds like it doesn't belong. It sounds like a whiff of the 20th century. I know. Yeah.
well, with-
But I couldn't resist it. I
Oh,
couldn't
but
resist
yeah,
it.
it's great. It's,
but-
it makes you sit up and
It does. Suddenly a little nightclub comes into Victorian London and then
yeah.
disappear.
Yeah. Well, they had those chords back then, right? 'Cause
Oh, sure.
You know, they were around. Just
Oh, sure,
kinda
but
hiding out.
But
in
when
different
you only use
places.
it when you only use it once in 500 pages of music, you think, wait a minute, you know, what's that wart doing in there? That's a little strange.
well, you
but
know.
no, but I like it still. I still like
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
Still
yeah.
makes me wince, but I still like it.
You talked about just in thinking about working with Milton Babbitt, you know, this is somebody like most concert music composers. They go into their lair and they come out with a grand symphony, and but you like always having a collaborator. You want to have that collaboration. You're of course writing musical theater, writing both the music and lyrics, which is not so common. I mean, there's a tradition of it, but it's not as common as doing one or the other. But you always want to have somebody in there that you're.
Yeah, to argue with, sure, absolutely. And somebody, because argument is how you know what you think. You know, there's a great phrase: "How do I know what I think till I hear what I say?" And that you do that when you have to argue with somebody. That's how you know. You do that with politics, anything. As soon as you have to argue, you have to. Then you realize what you think, and so that's very important. The other thing is, as I've said many times, if you get stuck on something and you've got a collaborator that you can call up at 2 a.m. and say, "I don't know how to write this song, and I can't understand the character. I don't know what she's doing." Somebody says, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well." So that's also very important to me.
Right.
People who do their stuff all alone with nobody to argue with, novelists, painters. I don't get it. I don't know how they do it.
Well, you in West Side Story, you actually had to collaborate with Bernstein on the lyrics themselves.
Well, that was
So
the
that must
setup
have
at the
been
beginning,
tough,
but
yeah.
that didn't last very long, as he.
Well, the piece lasted a long
No,
time.
no, but I mean, I ended up writing all the lyrics except for a couple of lines.
Right, but that's one of the things that you detail in here with the
well-
back and forth, that you had different sense of what type of lyrics.
His idea of poetry and my idea of poetry were
Yeah.
entirely opposite.
Yeah.
His idea of poetry was purple prose, and my idea of poetry, because I was, as most of you probably know, I was brought up artistically by Oscar Hammerstein, and my idea of poetry was simplicity, and Lenny's idea of poetry was exactly the reverse, was flowery and florid, a different kind of poetry with what I call poesy, capital P. And I just think that doesn't belong with music. I think that's fine on the page, but music is so rich that as soon as you take words or lines that rich, like what I call purple prose, it's like the frog that blows up. I mean, it just becomes, it's what they call in England over-egging the pudding. That's what it is.
Well, if you combine these two, you'd probably get a nice purple. These
Yep,
two,
so
actually.
one for boy, one for girl.
Right. It's. I was thinking about some things you said in this book about logical versus theatrical truth, which was nice because there's so much of this book is very logical. I mean, it's you outlined these certain sins that one can commit in writing lyrics. You're pretty specific about what those sins are, and certain principles. But then at a certain point, you said, sometimes there's a theatrical truth that's different from a logical truth.
Yeah, well, that doesn't apply to lyrics very much, but it does apply to plot and things like that. That was the example I give in the book is that logic would seem to dictate in the plot of West Side Story that that the placing of the bridal shop scene and the March to the Rumble should be in reverse order. But in fact, in the theater, the truth is the other. We wrote it that way, and Jerry Robbins said, no, that's not what it should be. And we said, Jerry, logically, the action doesn't follow that way. He said, I know, but it's wrong. And so we ran through it our way, and then we ran through it Jerry's way. And at the end of that, there was no argument at all. Jerry was right.
Yeah.
And so there are theatrical truths, and there's, because it's suspension of disbelief. That's the contract you make when you go into a theater. Is you suspend your disbelief, and you pretend there's no fourth wall there, and I'm singing to him and he's singing to me, but except we're looking at you, and it's and you accept it. It's perfectly acceptable. In fact, you wouldn't like it if we looked at each other and sang to each other. But if I'm singing there and he's singing there, and it's very clear that it's a duet. And that's a kind of theatrical truth.
Right. And you also talk about savoring the moment songs versus songs that drive the plot forward. And the point, which I guess it's you see that point. Well, Allegro as a kind of as a musical.
That was Oscar Hammerstein's great revolution in the theater, was that prior to Showboat, which is the watershed show, musicals, and for 15, 18, 20 years after Showboat, musicals, all the Gershwin musicals, the Rodgers and Hart musicals, all the Cole Porter musicals, all the musicals that in the commercial theater were scene, song, comedy scene, and then they come out and sing either a comic song or a ballad, and then another scene, and there was no attempt to fuse them, which seems odd, because opera had been doing it for 150 years, and operetta even had been doing it in its own way. And Oscar said, well, let's do that in musicals too. So Showboat, there's an attempt to fuse songs with the dialogue, with the story, so they're not just, as to use Lenny's favorite word, divertissement. They're not divertissement. They are songs that are the phrase that became popular after Oklahoma in critical press was the integrated musical. Well, yes, they're integrated. That's the point. That's what that's what Showboat did first, and then Oklahoma. By the time Oklahoma got done, everybody thought, maybe that's a good idea, because it was such a huge success.
Right.
That other writers thought, hey, maybe we should have the songs tell the story. Ooh, what an idea. Oh, my goodness,
Right.
None of them had ever seen an opera.
Right. But you learned, that's right. But you learned a lot from Allegro because it was a failure.
Yeah, when I was 17 years, this for those of you who have not read the first book, when I was 17 years old, Oscar wanted me to get a sort of practical hands-on lesson in theater. And so because he'd written Oklahoma and Carousel, two gigantic hits, and then he tried his hand at an experimental show called Allegro. And it was going to go in rehearsal in June and open on Broadway in September, which happened to coincide with my school. I was going to Williams College, and it happened to coincide with my summer vacation. So he said, would you like to be my assistant? So I was a gopher, meaning I got coffee and typed scripts and that sort of thing, and saw this show being put together, and that's how I got. Allegro did something that no show had ever done before. Also, Allegro used cinematic techniques to change scenes. Prior to Allegro, every musical that had ever been done, there would be a curtain. That's not mine. Curtain would come down, and then there'd be a scene like in front of the curtain, and the curtain would go up, and then there'd be a full stage set, and then maybe a wagon would come on. Wagon means a little platform on wheels, come on with a set, and then the curtain would come down. And in fact, there was a review once. There was a review called New Faces of 1952, in which the curtain came down, and a boy and a girl stood on the apron of the stage, the apron being the front 6-8 feet, and sang a song that went, they're changing the scenery, so I love you. And then the curtain would come up, and there'd be a huge set of, a cafe, But what Allegro did, did a wipe. It had Joe Mielziner designed the set was Oscar's idea. It was the stage was empty. It was sort of influenced by Our Town, just an empty stage. And there was a serpentine curtain went across like that. And so the curtain would go this way and reveal a set, like say a porch there, and go over here. And then the scene would be played. And then the curtain would come back and there'd be another, nightclub or whatever over there. So it was like a cinematic wipe, exactly like a camera wipe. And it was a revolutionary way of changing sets. Because the show was not a success, nobody picked up on it. The show was a failure. The next show they did was called South Pacific, and they used the same technique. And after that, every single show that's ever been done, every musical that's ever been done since South Pacific uses cinematic techniques. No longer do you have boom, 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 no more. But up until Allegro, every show had that. Yeah. Even Oklahoma had that. And it's an object lesson in that something can be influential only if it's a success, at least in the commercial theater.
But what I like, one of the things I really like about this book is that you place a lot of value on failure, like Beckett, I suppose.
It was very valuable that the show that I was a gopher on was a failure, because I watched a group of expert people, all of whom had success, because it was not only Rodgers and Hammerstein, Agnes DeMille was the director, and she was the hottest thing in town, and it was, you could not get a higher class of professionals, and they put on, I won't say a disaster, they put on something that didn't work. And I often thought about why it didn't work, and a friend of mine, a producer named Cameron Magadar, said, I'm spending my entire life trying to fix the second act of Allegro because I keep trying to do all this experimental work, like to try to make it work. But it was very valuable to see why, because as I looked, I thought, gee, that'll be wonderful. And then you'd see, particularly in front of an audience, how they didn't understand what was going on, or something was repetitious, or it didn't flow, whatever the hell it was, And there were just so many lessons, not even that I can really articulate, but it helps you smell what's not going to be effective.
Yeah.
And
well, you don't spare yourself here.
No.
I mean, because
I figured if I was going to criticize other people's work, I was going to criticize myself more.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose, as you say, you learn from arguing. You also learn when somebody says, this is what I don't like. I mean, I always felt that way in school, that my teachers often gave me examples of stuff that they thought was great. And I thought, well, what am I going to learn from this another great thing? It's another great piece, another great this. How about a flawed piece? And I remember that I used to teach Aaron Copland's Short Symphony, because I thought it was a flawed piece. And I thought, if I don't teach, as most of you know, I can't. But when I have taught students that, I mean, I will bring that work to them, because I think it's a wonderful piece, because the Copland Sextet is a fantastic piece, which is what he distilled out of that. But the actual short symphony was a disaster. Nobody could perform it. And
well, there's a romantic myth that all great works of art have flaws in them. I think the answer is all works of art have flaws in them. But there's a great. I'll tell you an anecdote. Slightly naughty, but it's all right. When Lenny, that's Bernstein, wrote Mass, big piece, choral orchestra piece, and was done at the Kennedy Center. Was directed by a man named Gordon Davison, and they were coming to the dress rehearsal, and Gordon said, Lenny, I got to tell you, I really think we need to cut things down a bit. It seems a little unwieldy and a little long to me. And Lenny said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, what would you cut? He said, well, would you let me just go home and study, and maybe tomorrow at rehearsal I'd like to do something, and then you come in and take a look at it. And clearly Gordon had been thinking it out and knew what he wanted to do. And Lenny said, sure. So Gordon worked the next day, and he cut about 25 minutes out of what was like an hour and 40-minute piece. And Lenny came in and saw it, and they ran through it. At the end, Gordon said, well, Lenny said, it's miraculous what you've done. He said, everything is tighter, everything is clearer, everything is so much more focused, and I want you to restore everything. And Gordon said, why? Lenny said, I want it to be flawed. That's what he said.
Well, I mean, And you did. Right.
And he restored it.
Okay. Well, the whole savoring the moment thing, that change, which then in your later musicals, because you did quite a bit of writing. You wrote some savor the moment pieces.
Well, the thing was, the first musical I wrote was my own music that got on Broadway.
Right.
Was a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, and there was an idea of a man named Bert Shevelov, whose idea was, and who co-wrote the book with Larry Gelbart. And Bert said, you're going to have to think entirely differently than you've ever thought before. This is based on the plays of Plautus, and the way songs were used back in Roman comedy was they were respites in the action. And he said, the songs must not be integrated. He said, you've got to say, each song should savor the moment. I mean, you build to a certain moment where, the son thinks that his father has eyes for the maid, but the maid is actually the son's would-be inamorata in disguise. And so you've got a father and son looking, and you just take that moment and you just play with that moment. Then you go on with the plot. And that's most difficult score I've ever had to write, because I've been trained by Oscar to do exactly the verse. And what Bert was saying is, now you have to go back before Oklahoma and go back to what musicals used to be, which is scene and then a song that savors the moment. Scene, song that savors the moment. Scene. And that's the show where I did that. There are other moments in other shows where you want to savor the moment, but even then I try to move from point A to point B. Because one of the things Oscar instilled in me was the notion that if you can take the song out of the show and it doesn't affect the texture or the through line of the show, the song is not necessary. That a song should be necessary, even if it's just to move from her being happy to her being sad, or happy to a little less happy, but something that makes that carries the action, by which I do not mean necessarily plot, but the action, internal action, emotional action, forward. And if it does that, then the song may not belong in the show because it's no good, but it belongs in the show because it's necessary to the text. If you take it out, there's a little hole in the fabric. And
well, these are the kind of songs though, that may have the danger of doing what you call drawing attention to the lyricist rather than the lyric.
Yeah, well,
Right.
a lot of writers composers do that too sometimes.
Yeah. So in
Point attention to
music,
themselves
it's,
and not to the piece.
yeah.
Yeah.
What
yeah.
is that in music?
There are times when music becomes too elaborate, or when there's some arioso singing or some duet. I'm not gonna point any fingers, but there are times when that happens.
Well, you're okay to point fingers at the dead people here. Right,
Dead people are.
Dead people are.
I've always said that it's fine to criticize. There's that old canard about never speak ill of the dead. Who else to speak ill of? It doesn't hurt their feelings, and they can't talk back. So those are two reasons to speak ill of the dead. Speaking ill of the living, it hurts people's feelings, and so I don't do that, except for myself.
Right. But yeah, you don't definitely do not spare yourself.
Speaking ill of myself is okay.
The other side of the coin from the kind of savor the moment is the intricate plot. So you have some of those that are incredible,
I love
like
to write little plays and songs.
Chrysanthemum Tea. That's one that I'm thinking
Chrysanthemum
of,
Tea
which
is
is
an entire
incredible.
murder mystery in
That's in
8
Pacific
minutes of Pacific Overtures.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
The opening of the second act of Sweeney Todd, God, that's good.
God, that's
There's
good, yeah.
27 pieces of action going on at the same time.
Or A Weekend in the Country.
Yeah, Weekend in the Country, the end of the first act, and music.
Which-
I love writing those things. I'm a playwright manqué. I don't. This is not modesty. I don't have the skills to be a playwright, and I don't think I have the fortitude either. But I have the skills and the fortitude to write little 8-minute and 10-minute plays that have music in them, and I love plotting things. That's terrific.
And people have viewed you more as a lyricist than a composer.
Well, that's because I
Although
started
it's
out
not
that
true.
way.
Yeah,
I started
yeah.
out that way. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
meaning publicly.
Do you think that was being tarred with the?
Yeah, I was. It took a long. There's still people who think, why doesn't he just stick to writing lyrics? He can't write music. There's still people who think that.
Why don't you?
Why don't I? Because it's only fun when you're writing music.
Right. Well, because you enjoy
Lyric writing is sweat work. It's really grunt work. It's just awful. It is.
You
It's
get all the blame and
Very,
none of the
very,
credit.
very, very hard, and it never comes out as well as it should, or rarely, should say, rarely comes out as well as it should.
And people remember the composer.
That's
and
the other
not
thing. Yes, right. I remember there's a famous anecdote about Dorothy Hammerstein talking to, I guess to Jerome Kern's wife, and she was saying, you know, when Jerry wrote Old Man River, and Dorothy said, no, he wrote Dum Bum Bada. Oscar wrote Old Man River.
Right, right. You're a big Dorothy Fields fan.
I am a big Dorothy
Yeah.
Fields fan.
Yeah.
I was talking about Dorothy Hammerstein, but that's
Oh,
another lady
okay,
entirely.
okay. Right,
Yeah,
okay.
no, yeah,
Right,
I'm a big Dorothy Fields fan. She was a
Right,
wonderful lyric writer.
I mean, some of the lyricists I remember really from the book that stand out that you talk about are Yip Harburg, her, and
Frank Lesser.
Frank
Oh, there
Lesser
are a
later
lot
on.
of-
Yeah,
there
Frank
are a
Lesser.
number of
is-
the other-
Well, also, I always think of you in the tradition of Frank Lesser because.
Well, we're urban Jewish New Yorkers, of course. I mean,
But who wrote lyrics and the
lyrics
and
and music, right?
Yeah.
But you know that was something. Well, Cole Porter did, and you know, nobody better. And in recent generations, there are quite a few who write lyrics and music. Part of it is the influence of pop music, where so many bands and the writers in the band write both the music and the lyrics. You know, and it's Paul Simon and there's Bob Dylan. I mean, there's a whole now tradition. So many of the young writers for musical theater now, I'd say probably when I do some teaching, or I'm also head of a thing called the Richard Rogers Production Award, the American Academy, which gives money to young songwriters for the theater. And I'd say half the submissions we get, maybe more, are by people who write both music and lyrics. It's much more common now because there are generations brought up in the pop tradition. So they're interested right away in writing both as they grow up, as they get 10, 12, 15 years old, and they get interested. So they want to write both.
And have you heard any rap music that you like?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think. Well, you know, the first rap number that was ever on the musical stage, and it's a great number, and I think it's responsible for the huge success of the show, is The Music Man. The first number of The Music Man is rap, and it's awesomely brilliant, and which a group of salesmen are imitating the sound of the train that they're on, but giving you all the exposition in what amounts to rap. And I think rap, I don't know why nobody, including myself, nobody ever picked up on that. Now you can't always, it's not always useful, but you know, it never occurred to me to take that technique. Maybe I was just so dazzled by what he had done, and maybe I didn't even recognize it as a new technique. But and it wasn't. It's, of course, it's a vaudeville tradition. That kind of stuff. Rap comes out of vaudeville, and but yeah, you know, I think some like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's now doing a rap musical about Alexander Hamilton, and that sounds ridiculous. I've heard some of the songs. It's not so ridiculous at all.
Yeah.
The problem with rap, as with the problem with all pop and rock, is variety. All that stuff is fine in small doses, but over an evening it tends to get monotonous. There's a lack of variety of tone in most rock, pop, even concerts. Concerts are interrupted a lot by applause and they have, you know, and their individual little songs, or a bit more long songs. But telling a story, involving an audience, and having enough variety so it isn't just, that's hard. And that's the problem with rap also.
Yeah.
And I know Lynn, and I've talked to him about it. He's aware of it. He's a smart guy, and he was brought up in traditional musical theater, so he's got both respect and love for it. And he recognized that too. And I'm not sure how those things are solved. All I know is it's a problem.
Well, also, I suppose pop music is very much based on, you know, this kind of song, this song, then this song, then this song. It's not, it doesn't have that through line in terms of narrative.
No, although many pop songs, you know, are their own narratives. There've been, you know, that's been going on for a long time. You know, everywhere from Leonard Cohen to,
Right.
you know, there's a lot of
But
that stuff.
as far as a big narrative that can carry you through a whole
it's
evening, I
hard.
suppose, yeah, that would be
But it's
the
particularly
challenge.
in terms of variety. It's variety that often, you know, when I started teaching, and I'd make when I was at Oxford, I made them develop a whole show, and instead of just writing songs. I said, I want you to develop a show, find a subject, and most of them had already started on something. I said, the real problem, because they would then come in and perform the songs, and everybody would say, oh, that's great, they performed 3 or 4 songs. I said, it's when you get to the 5th song, you're going to get in trouble. Then the 6th, then the 7th, then the 8th and the 9th and the 10th. Now it gets harder because you've sort of, you've done all the primary colors. You've done your red song, your blue song, your green song, your yellow song. Now what? There aren't any more colors. Well, so you gotta do a little purple. Now you got to start mix the colors. You got to have variety, and variety is very important. Thank you. Yes, I got 2 more books to go, I guess. No, 1 actually, just a yellow. And that's necessary. If you're going to ask an audience to sit in their seats for 2.5 hours, including a 20-minute intermission, you got to give them some. There's got to be variety. I mean, Shakespeare knew how to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly talking about variety, your work has in every show it's been something different.
Yeah.
It's like you each
from
took
show
a
to
different
show.
challenge for each piece.
Yeah. Well, there are foxes and hedgehogs, and I'm a fox. I mean,
Steve Reich.
I know a
is hedgehog.
little. Yes,
Right.
I know a little about a lot of things, and not a lot about one thing.
Right. Yeah, but well.
That's right. No, Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams is a hedgehog.
Wait, what did you say?
Tennessee Williams is a hedgehog.
Oh, Tennessee Williams is a hedgehog. Right. Okay.
Take one
Okay.
plot, and he knows one thing very deeply, very deeply.
Yeah, but each show kind of has a different challenge. Like, I mean, when just in looking through these, it's almost like you go from a funny thing on the way to the forum to, to Follies to.
No.
I mean, it just goes from one.
No, I hate
so many
to I
times.
hate to revisit something I've done before. After I wrote the lyrics for Gypsy, I got a number of people came and said, we got this great idea, the life of, and then they I don't know, Sarah Bernhardt or Betty Davis or I just showbiz stories.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the difference between pastiche and parody as being. Pastiche was a tribute, maybe, and parody is a little
pastiche
bit
is
of
really
a,
an imitation without making a comment.
Right.
Without making a comment, you don't do what they call a takeoff on. You don't do a parody. A parody is to take the characteristics and exaggerate them like a cartoon enough so that they become giggly. But pastiche is a fond imitation. But fond is the key word. You got to really you got to love what you parody too. Come to think of it.
Yeah.
But there are fine distinctions between parody and pastiche and burlesque and satire and all those. They're fine distinctions. But for me, what pastiche is the kind of stuff I did in Follies. I was never trying to make fun of any of those. Even it'd be so easy to make fun of operetta, of the Romberg, for example. The first song I wrote was "One More Kiss," which is my idea of what Romberg would have written, rather than a takeoff on it.
Right. But I suppose you have to love it enough to.
Oh, sure. And then you just studied.
To
And you've got to, also, when you're imitating, pastiche, you can't you've got to pastiche people who have very strong characteristics of their art, whatever it is. You can't pastiche something that's bland.
Right.
You have to pastiche something that that has, again, Romberg, pastiche operetta, you know what you're doing. You can pastiche Rodgers and Hammerstein, They're very strong style. You can certainly pastiche Cole Porter. It's, very, very, very strong style,
Yeah.
And so you have to pick your targets carefully.
Yeah. I would like to Susan's got the faithful microphone. Are there questions that some of you all have that you'd like to ask Steve? Don't call him Mr. Sondheim.
No, Mr. Sondheim is my father. He's no longer available.
Definitely don't call him Dr. Sondheim. Right.
So I'd like to lead off.
That's Eric.
I read Finishing the Hat last year. In fact, it was my main birthday present, and enjoyed it a lot. But as already came out in your conversation, the big thing that's missing from that book is much discussion about music. And yet there are a few intriguing passages, which I was hoping you might follow up on. At a couple of points, you mentioned your favorite theater composers, just in passing, without saying why you liked them so much. They were, if I remember correctly, Jerome Kern, who we discussed a bit, and Harold Arlen. And I found those choices a little bit surprising. Now you've explained Jerome Kern a little bit in all the things you are, and what a brilliant piece of technique that was. But Kern was also very, in many cases, rather sentimental. And it seems to me that you've always tried to avoid sentimentality.
Well, one man's sentiment is another man's sentimentality. I mean, that's a matter of personal taste. Also, I'm not sure what sentimental music is. Sentimental music divorced from lyrics is it's pretty hard to define. It's when lyrics sort of color it. I think that's one of the things. Sorry, but
you don't think I'm Old-Fashioned is pretty sentimental as a tune?
No, I sure don't. And the release of that is something I would gladly sign my name to. That chord progression in that release, if that's your idea of sentimental, that's my idea of dazzling. I sure don't. I wouldn't agree with you on that.
So is it the technique of Kern that
I think it's the melodic flow. I think he's a real melodist. The way, why do you like Schubert if you like Schubert? It's about, well, if you like it, it's probably because he's a melodist. And that's what I think Kern is. I think Kern is our closest to Schubert in the musical theater.
And Arlen?
Arlen is everything. Arlen is a melodist, and his harmonic originality is unmatched. I don't know anybody who has including Gershwin, who has except in Porgy and Bess. Porgy and Bess is always the exception to everything. But I think nobody has Arlen's harmonic imagination, and but that's the major thing I love about Arlen. Kern, it's about melody, although there's some pretty startling, I Am So Eager is a pretty startling piece of harmonic manipulation. But Arlen, just, oh goodness, you take virtually anything he's written. I Wonder What Became of Me. I mean, anyway, that's what it's the harmonic thing there. It's not the only
Wizard
reason.
of Oz, all those songs.
Oh, Wizard of Oz,
It's
yeah.
incredible. And Stormy Weather.
In the second book, I cover why I didn't talk more about music. It's because in order to talk about music, you have to start using jargon. You have to start using words like diatonic, and you have to start using things about cadences and about Neapolitan sixths and things like that. And so suddenly you're into kind of arcana for most of the readership, most people,
And also, if you can't hear it,
yeah, that's another. Well, curiously enough, I was going to do that. I had a really ambitious idea. I thought what I would do is I would illustrate klutzy lyric writing or some of the sins in lyric writing, and do the same thing with music by writing little passages and recording them, and then there would be a CD that would go with the book. And for example, I would take one line and set it in different ways, different harmonies, a different rise and fall of the melodic line, a different not only dynamic structure but rhythmic structure. Let's say set a line in 3/4 and then set a line in 4/4 and set a line with a lot of whole notes, set a line with a lot of and illustrate that.
right?
And I thought that'll be really good. And then I thought, all that work, I can't. It was enough writing a paragraph. I'm not a prose writer by nature, and so I didn't. But that's the only reason, because I would love to talk about music. And one of the things I enjoyed so much with the composing contingent at Oxford was being able to do just what you're talking about.
Yes.
I think it's correct that you've never had the desire to direct any of the things that you've done. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between you as the lyricist or the songwriter or the composer and the director, and what makes for a successful versus an unsuccessful collaboration?
Well, collaboration.
Since you didn't decide, that's something you didn't want to take on.
I don't really think of the director, a writer, as a collaboration. I'm very conservative, and I make a distinction between creative art and interpretive art. For me, the collaboration is between the other writer and myself, or writers and myself. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know how to avoid saying it. I think the director is a servant of the material. I think he should be. And one of the pleasures of writing with James Lapine is he's both a writer and director. Most directors think they're writers, and it's very, very difficult territory there.
They want to save a piece of work or something.
Well, they want it. That's later.
Oh.
If a show fails, if a show fails, you go to any college campus, and the director. I mean, there's a show I wrote called Merrily We Roll On. It goes backwards in time. It was a failure, commercial failure. Hofstra College did it in reverse. They did the show in reverse order. They thought they could fix it that way. I could go. That's just one example. Another one.
Rolling and then rolling back.
You
Yeah.
got it. That's how they did it
Wow.
before. They thought that would work. It didn't work. I could give you many examples of when a show is a failure. Every director on every college campus thinks and some of them aren't just college directors. Some of them are professionals. They do it in summer stock in theaters. The directors really think they know better than the writers, quite often. But mostly, what they are writers manqué, and so they want to put, quote, their stamp on it. However, in a good collaboration with the director, directors have varying strengths the way writers do. For example, Hal Prince, his great strength is his mise en scène, is the conception of the show as an arc. Where I quarrel with him is in the individual things, in the small, in I'd say actually the middle ground. What is a scene about? How is a story being told, et cetera, et cetera. Then there are directors who are very good on story, but not so good at that. Then there are directors who are good with actors and not with that. Jerry Robbins was terrible with actors because he couldn't articulate to them what he wanted. Being a choreographer, the only way he really knew how to communicate was through his body. And also, he was also a wonderful mise en scène man. So you have to work with a director the way you do with a writer, playing to each other's strengths. Often a director, a good director sometimes is a good editor and will say, I think this scene is losing focus. And that can be enormously helpful. I've seen Lapine do that with other people's work, and he's done that with William Finn's work. Lapine has collaborated with Bill Finn on March's Falsettos and those shows, and I watched because I saw March's Falsettos when it was first done as in a workshop. It was called a great title. It was called Four Jews in a Room Bitching was the name of the show, and under Lapine's tutelage, he focused it and became March's Falsettos. So I've watched a director, but that's partly because James is a writer himself. And that's something a director can do. The other thing is a director is responsible very much for keeping the pace of the show going, and certainly the look, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a collaboration with a director is really, as I say, creator to interpreter or creator to editor, rather than a collaboration in creation.
But by the way, I remember either you told me this once or having seen it in an interview, but you talked about how you think you would be a lousy director because you would get too...
Oh, I get impatient. No, actually, actors and singers think I'm a wonderful director. They're constantly telling other people, it's because I direct them for half an hour. I direct them for 45 minutes. Okay, darling, do the song now. Okay, now look, let's look at the first. And I'm very good because I know, as a writer, exactly what I intended, so I'm able to articulate that. And I'm also, because I'm good at it, I'm able to free the performer so they don't feel that they're being straitjacketed into exactly what I want, but they know my intention and they can get to it themselves. And they are almost always delighted with me. But again, 45 minutes, I leave the room. A director has to be there 8 hours a day and say, no, darling, that's not, no, it's a comic scene.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So,
And also they have to sit with somebody who can't do it.
Well, that,
And-
also they are, because they are not the writer. They may, often Hal will come to me or and say, exactly what did you mean here? I said, well, this is what I meant. Oh, okay, all right, okay. So sometimes they need the feedback from the writer to know exactly what's intended. Because one of the things I learned from Jerome Robbins is to stage everything in my head. So that the director has a blueprint or a springboard, then he can do what he wants. But I know exactly, after I write a song, exactly what each line is intended. I can even sometimes tell you exactly why I put in a consonant here and there, or why I didn't use an alliteration, or why I put in a rhyme. All I have to do is tell that, and then the director can do whatever he wants, because I have a purpose in mind. And all I have to do is convey that purpose, and that's the thing. And that's what a good director can do, is help an actor find the purpose that's intended, And sometimes you get swell feedback from actors too. An actor's instinct is something you have to. Often it's way off base. But if your ear and your eye are constantly alert, an actor can often. I got a wonderful idea in Into the Woods from a conversation with Joanna Gleason, who's a very smart lady, and we were talking one night. She was talking about something in the second act. She said, "Steve, I just feel the character's in the wrong story." I said, "What an idea!" And I even put it into a line. But it was an insight into exactly who the baker's wife is. She finds herself in the wrong story, and that has a real emotional resonance when you think about it in your own life. When you're in the wrong story.
There's a bunch of stories
Oh,
mixed up
yeah.
in there. Yeah. There's
If someone were writing a profile of you, what aspects of your art would you want the writer to emphasize?
I think the principles about content dictating form and God is in the it's the meticulousness. It sounds pretentious, but I'll say it anyway. I wrote the book to show people that art is hard work. It's always complimentary in a way when somebody comes up and says, "Oh, you're so talented." It's not what it's about. What it's about is hard work. It's all about everybody is talented in one way or another. There are many talents, many talents. You can tell that every child who comes home from kindergarten with a drawing, everybody's talented. It's the hard work and the application of hard work and learning the principles of how you make a piece of art out of a vision, out of your imagination, whatever the definition of talent is. That's what I think I would want. Everybody should know that art is hard work.
Yeah. And also you point out when certain people are more or less lazy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you talk about Hart in this way about saying, yes,
Lawrence
he was
Hart drives me
talented
cra-
and he could do
Lawrence
just
Hart
about
drives
anything.
me crazy. No, somebody who's as gifted is hard. It's much worse when somebody like that is lazy than when somebody who is not as gifted is lazy. But when somebody's that gifted, then they owe it to themselves and to the rest of us to work harder. That's all. And that's my conservative nature, That's my Germanic past.
Maybe I don't know, maybe we have time for one more question. Yes.
I think at some point you made a remark about the best theatrical writing you know was Larry Haworth in Porgy.
Best lyrics.
Yeah. Can you explain that?
Sure. He had, if you take a look at a lyric like My Man's Gone Now or Summertime, most of the lyrics in Porgy are his. All of the lyrics in the first act are, and most of the stuff in the second and third. There is a poetic imagination. He was able to write poetic lyrics as opposed to poetry. As I was talking earlier, poetry, when music is set to it, art songs, of course, are full of poetry. Often people will take poems and set them, and that often makes an art song. But for telling a story in a theatrical context, you have to underwrite to a certain extent. The lyrics can't be too rich, or the richness of music makes it, as I say, over-eggs the pudding. Hayward was always it's always 1 millimeter away from being too rich, but it isn't. Those lyrics glow. I don't know how else to put it. It's very hard to tell why you admire something. But there is a fullness and a richness to his lyrics, I think inspired Gershwin to write that score. I think Gershwin would not have written that extraordinary score if he hadn't been working with that extraordinary poet. The two of them, I think Hayward just sparked him. I don't know this for a fact, and I've read a lot of it, but I think it's more than a coincidence. At any rate, those lyrics, you can read those lyrics and they are poems. And then you hear them with music and they're not too much. I don't know any other set of lyrics that's like that. Most lyrics that sing well, I make a whole big deal in Finishing the Hat about Oscar Hammerstein's lyrics, which on paper are really, it's like, Spot sees the ball, Spot gets the ball. Look at Spot, get the ball. They're just not to be read. You don't read, oh, what a beautiful morning, oh, what a beautiful day, I got a beautiful feeling, everything's going my way, and get any kind of thrill. I mean, there's no, but you set it to Richard Rodgers' music, then it's a whole other matter. Then the balloon lifts off the ground, and then you are soaring, and that's the point. Hayward is the exception. His stuff on paper is just as rich as when Gershwin sets it, and I know that Gershwin's music is that good because of Hayward. I just know it.
Well, anyway, this is great reading, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks.